TikTok, it's time to rock, ladies and gentlemen. We have a special event. We always love these special shows that we do on the ZoSo show when we get together with Allen to talk about anything and all things Led Zeppelin. Alan, how many times have you been on the show with us talking about Led Zeppelin now? Is it 4 or 5 shows?
It could have been. I may have jumped on once. Officially, really, it's just these 2 shows that we've just done where it's just me blathering. But it's great. I love being with you, and thanks for having me again.
No problem. And we do, like I say, look forward to it. And what's really, really cool about getting Alan on, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching live or on a replay, we really, really appreciate the comments that you've left on the couple of shows that we've had Alan on. So, and Alan's always gone back and he's answered your questions, and he's also, just reiterated some points, which is what we love. It's what we love because it's what fans are doing, Alan. And I suppose we're always going to keep talking about that. I need to, before we continue the show, I need to say hi to you from Steve Rosen, because we had Steve Rosen on our show. We were very fortunate, Brad and I, to hang out with him. He reached out to us. Yeah. So he said, when you see Alan, say hi. We spoke to him off air, and he was kind of chuffed, and I'm going to blow a bit of smoke our way, a bit of, he couldn't get over, the fact that we were referencing that Led Zeppelin interview that he did. And I said to him, well, actually, my understanding and the importance of that interview goes back to meeting Alan and talking to Alan, and why that's so important. So, and he goes, so he knows you. So you're an insider too, bro.
Yeah. Stephen and I have sent lots of emails over the years, and he's an amazing guy and is the source of so much knowledge, no question about it. For a lot of things. The Jimmy Page interview was very important, and needless to say, his Eddie Van Halen interviews are the crucial ones. Really, him and Jas Obrecht really are the fountains for the classic Van Halen era. And Brad Talinsky and Chris Gill have done the excellent job from like the 90 period onward. But then they've both had both Brad and Chris had the knowledge to ask the questions going back to the classic Van Halen era. So, but in the moment, really Steven was the guy during the classic Van Halen era from, roughly, 78, 79 through 80, 89 or so, and I cannot say enough good things about Steven. I mean, he's on the Mount Rushmore of journalists and just rock journalists to begin with. Hold on a second, let me see what
that's
my son
okay.
Yes,
that's all cool.
Okay, hey Riley, could you help him with his pad? Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's awesome. Technical difficulty on my son's entertainment device.
No, it's no problem. But look, it's always good, isn't it? And I love the fact that these networks are going on with fans and and reputable writers and authors and guys that have hung out and shared these experiences in real life with the guys that we admire. And
absolutely. I mean, I'll insert another thing about Steven real quick, and we can get on to Led Zeppelin. But
sure,
his questions, and it goes to, even I have to say this for our friends Brad and Chris Gill, and even Joss and some of the others, but those guys, it's really Brad and Chris and Steven and Joss are the ones that ask the really insightful questions that drill down, and Eddie tells them, they ask, okay, well, what guitar did you use on that song? And he says what guitar he used on the song. You know, they ask him, well, how did you start? What songs did you learn when you were a kid? And Eddie tells them. And, you know, there are lots of other journalists that might have just not comprehended the questions to ask. You know, all those guys are players, you know, and they know to ask the questions, you know, and they inform my transcriptions of Van Halen. They inform, you know, they answer all the questions that really there's not a whole lot of questions that haven't already been answered by these guys. And, you know, because, you know, me and so many of my generation were going back to the interviews from the magazines themselves when they were first published.
Sure.
And, you know, that's the source of the information. And then I'm so glad that at this point, particularly for Stephen with the Tone Chaser book, that he's getting his opportunity to do what he intended to do with Edward's interviews, which was originally going to be the life and times of Edward Van Halen that ultimately didn't end up coming out. And I know Stephen probably talked to you about that, but it's even better now that Stephen can tell his complete story and then some. I think Tone Chaser probably went beyond what he even thought he was going to do with the life and times of Edward Van Halen back in the late 80s, you know? So it's exciting. I haven't gotten the book yet. It's on the way. I know he's sending them. I was among the first couple of people ordering them, so I should have mine soon. And, you know, if Stephen happens to watch this or hear this or anything, you know, and I'll probably shoot him an email again soon, but wow, congratulations. And we're all glad that things worked out the way that they worked out and that he was able to do this book and make it happen and do it under his own terms. So I'm really excited about that and glad for Stephen, and we're glad to have him and what he's done. So anyway.
Wow. Well, you know, and coming from you and the reputation that you have in our community, you know, that says something. I just want to echo one other little point too about the in-depth analysis and the understanding that the reporters had that Alan made reference to, ladies and gentlemen. And I think Alan and I discussed this on one other live show a while ago. The interview that Eddie had with the Smithsonian Institute woman, you know, that was such a disappointment when it came to the questions, you know, that the writers gave her because they could have made so much more out of that opportunity. You know, for example, there's just one point, the reference that she was making about him being heavily influenced by Jimi Hendrix. And we love Jimi Hendrix. This is not an attack or a crack at Jimi Hendrix. And he said, he said, no. Couple of times he said it was Clapton. It was you know, and it was almost like, just a little bit abrasive there. You know, mate, you know, I'm putting into something that probably didn't happen, but it's like, you know, well, how many times have I had to tell you guys that Clapton was mine?
Right. Well, you know, it's funny, and I almost don't blame her, and. For this reason, one thing to look at this way, to me, in my opinion, and for whatever my opinion's worth, I believe that there are really two contenders for the greatest electric guitarists that have ever lived.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion. But,
we love it.
You know, it's either Jimi Hendrix or it's Eddie Van Halen. And my personal thing, I think it's probably Jimi Hendrix is probably the number one guy, and Eddie is maybe a close second. But, you know, it's, you know, lists are irrelevant, but, you know, there's only some people that can be in the conversation with Edward in that ilk. So people will immediately jump to Jimi Hendrix, you know, because Hendrix was such an immediate force and game changer for the entire thing. And so was Eddie. And so people don't often put Clapton in that stratosphere, you know, I mean, some of which is because Clapton was probably less concerned with, you know, maybe pushing the envelope and he hadn't developed as a songwriter and Cream and, you know, things came later. And, you know, so he wasn't sort of the force that Hendrix was. But Clapton clearly touched Edward more than anybody else. And as I've said many times, he put Clapton's licks into nearly all of his solos. And And Eddie was always quick to make the point that no, it was not Hendrix, it was Clapton that was his main influence. And to his good credit, he didn't. People, and I always say this, people act like Eddie lied about a lot of stuff, but Eddie was really very, very often telling the truth when he talked about guitars and music. And he wasn't, he wasn't blowing smoke. When he talked about his love for Eric Clapton and the fact that he studied him so intently, he was not lying. And the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in Edwards playing. And, I've talked about it many times, given many examples. I've done a video about it on my channel. And, my good friend Bill Flanagan helped explain that to me. And I kind of try to pass that information forward because he specifically showed me how exactly it's in there. And I tried to kind of get that point across to people as well. So anyway, so I give people some leeway in the sense that, if you're going to talk about the greatest, Hendrix always comes into the picture. And I think that's why people tend to refer to Hendrix when they were talking to Eddie about his influences,
And isn't that wonderful? And I'm going to attach that link to that video because the video that Alan talks about humbly is a very, very important video about the lick. And I'm not going to tell. I know what the video is, but if you're not familiar with it, and if you are watching a replay, I will attach it about here on the video for you to go and have a look because it's a remarkable achievement. And I know that you're a humble guy, Al, but what you've done on your channel, please go and subscribe to. If you're watching, go and subscribe to Alan's channel. Tell him that the 5150 show sent you as well. Go and subscribe to him because he's got some good stuff on there. Alan doesn't raise any banner flags. He's just doing his own thing. Jumps on our channel and other people's channels. So we'll raise Alan's banner for him.
No, well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that very much. And, that leads us into our topic, really,
Sure.
Because, these guys worked in proximity to each other, talking about Clapton and Hendrix and Keith Richards, and it kind of meshed around. You might want to pull up. We can pick up where we had kind of left off. I had left something out of a couple of things out of the Led Zeppelin 1 era, and if you can pull up that picture, that's Keith Richards playing at the Brian Jones Hyde Park Memorial gig where they debuted Mick Taylor as the new lead guitarist of the Stones, and there is Keith playing the 58 Flying V, one of the very few. That particular Flying V was used by Jimmy Page to record the lead guitar on You Shook Me from the first album. And I forgot to mention that on the last show that we did. So that guitar was used in conjunction with the gray Vox prototype wah that I had mentioned in the last show as well. He got an Octavia type of sound by positioning the wah-wah opening to where it creates an octave up effect.
Sure.
And for decades I thought that was actually an Octavia, but I confirmed that it was not an Octavia. I actually spoke to Roger Mayer, who Jimmy often referred to as having made fuzzes for him, and I assumed that Roger had made an Octavia for him for Jimmy Page. He never did, and so interestingly, Roger, I think Roger may have made a fuzz for Jimmy that he may have used on sessions way back in the early days, but it was not the Solo Sound Professional Mark II tone bender that Jimmy used in the Yardbirds and in Led Zeppelin. That was just a stock piece that Jimmy had bought in Denmark Street. And so long story short, I confirmed that no, Jimmy never got an Octavia from Roger, and Roger never actually built any of the famous fuzzes for Jimmy Page. And so that set me to thinking, well, gosh, how did he get that sound? And so I then realized on careful listening, and then my good friend Ollie Chapman, who is a guy, and I had sent a link to his video, and maybe I'll send that to you again. But sure. Ollie's in the UK. He's a great enthusiast of Page, and he did an amazing demo video where he used a gray Vox prototype wreplica wah-wah and I think he used a a tone bender clone, and he achieved with a Telecaster virtually the identical tone that you hear on the album version of You Shook Me. So Ollie is amazing, and Ollie convinced me that that's exactly what was going on there. And I realized that all of the things on the first album that sound like an Octavia, like an octave up effect, and you hear it on Dazed and Confused, on some of the overdubs in Dazed and Confused, and you really, really hear it in You Shook Me. So again, You Shook Me is the flying V. Everything else on the first album, electric guitar, is the psychedelic Telecaster. Now, the other thing that I forgot to mention last week is the Fender 10-string pedal steel on the first album. And so Jimmy had obviously used that on Your Time Is Gonna Come, and he used it on Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You for overdubs on those two songs. And I was remiss in forgetting to talk about that. And then I believe Jimmy had said that it sounds out, the pedal steel on the first album sounds out of tune because he hadn't gotten the kit to tune it up yet at that point. So he was just kind of winging it by ear on the first album. And then by the time he got to the third album, he was using he had actually gotten the kit, and it was he got it tuned properly, and you hear his progression from where he was just feeling his way into figuring out how to play it on the first album, versus what you hear on Tangerine, which is wonderful pedal steel playing, and on That's the Way, which is that wonderful, beautiful, masterful, in tune pedal steel playing that you hear on the third album. So anyway, so I wanted to get those two things caught up from the last time. And then today we're going to roll on and talk about Led Zeppelin 2, that album, the Brown Bomber. What a great record. And as I had mentioned before, and as has been mentioned many times, this is the album where Jimmy switched from the Telecaster to the Les Paul. So there is no Telecaster on the second album, to the best of my knowledge. Jimmy has always said it was the Les Paul on the second album, and I believe that to be the case.
Yep.
I tried to nail down when Jimmy got that Les Paul from Joe Walsh, as he says.
Yes.
And it's very tricky. There probably was a point in the very early days, like possibly in late 68, early 69, when Zeppelin came to America, where they crossed paths with Joe and the James Gang. And this would have led to Joe selling Jimmy the #1 Les Paul. It's clear that Jimmy had the Les Paul by the time the band got back to the UK in early 69, where they played a lot of club gigs in the UK. And then he didn't play the Les Paul in public in the UK in the early part of 1969. And the first, as near as I can tell, the first public appearance of the Les Paul was in April of 69 at the Fillmore West. And so the Fillmore West bootlegs, which are fairly famous, there's that stuttering effect that you hear Eddie doing at the end of the You Really Got Me solo with the pickup switch, like the kill switch effect. And so Jimmy does that trick during those bootlegs. So even though we don't have pictures of those shows, we have clear-cut evidence that the Les Paul is being used, because that's not possible on a Telecaster.
Sure.
There's a pickup selector on the Telecaster, but there's no way to use it as a kill switch, as it's wired normally. And from what I can tell, Jimmy's was completely wired normally with a tone control and a volume control, just like a regular Telecaster. So, the very earliest recordings are there. Yet, Jimmy started recording the second album. Very first session was for Whole Lotta Love and What Is and What Should Never Be. That was the Les Paul. For some reason, Jimmy had that Les Paul in his possession for months and months and didn't use it at any shows. And then all of a sudden, it just shows up being used in San Francisco as he's, started the tour and started the recording session. So just there was a moment where there were a couple of shows where he used both the Telecaster and the Les Paul, but the Les Paul came, those first two sessions, included What Is and What Should Never Be and A Whole Lot of Love. And those are the pictures that we have, which are amazing, from Olympic Studios. And that would have been again from April of, I believe it was April of '69 when that started. And if you can pull up, we'll talk about, because this gives us what the great deal of knowledge that we have from those sessions. That's one of them right there. That's going to show a lot of the gear there. Just behind that microphone to Jimmy's right, you'll see the one Rickenbacker transonic cabinet with a Vox long tom echo on top of it. And then on the left, you see the other Rickenbacker transonic cabinet with the Vox UL 4120 amplifier head on top of it. And then in the lower corner down by Jimmy's left foot, you will see the top of that Supro, that particular modified Supro Coronado 1690T amplifier that Jimmy used for the entirety of the first album down there. To the best of my reckoning, I believe that he only used that Supro to amplify the theremin in the Whole Lot of Love session. This picture is a picture, as far as I can tell, this picture is likely from the session for Whole Lot of Love, and possibly What Is and What Should Never Be might have been done on this very day as well. That's from what I can tell. That's a better picture there. You can see a good close-up of the Vox long tom echo. Now, the primary deal with the tone on Whole Lot of Love and a couple of the other songs on the second album. So the Vox UL 4120 amplifier head, and I think you have a picture of that if you can pull. That's it right there. So the Vox UL 4120 amplifier head, that was a bass amplifier. It's an all solid state head. It is not a tube amplifier. It's relatively clean. It's a very, very loud amplifier, and it's going right into the guitar is going into the Vox long tom echo, and then that is going into that amplifier head, and then out through the Rickenbacker transonic cabinets, which have Jensen speakers installed in them. So that is the tone. It's very, very loud, and there is a preamp that is in the Vox long tom echo that is it's somewhat akin to an Echoplex preamp, but without as much gain. It's not as an Echoplex preamp is very subtle, and the preamp that's in the Vox long tom is actually even less present than the Echoplex preamp. Wow. So the sound that you're hearing on Whole Lot of Love, the main rhythm guitar sound, is the middle pickup position, with that Vox UL head turned up very loud, probably all the way up, with the Vox long tom echo preamp giving him just a little bit of push. So it's a fairly clean sound where you really can't, it's overdriven, but it's, the power of that sound is really from that. It's not what most people think of as, people consider Whole Lot of Love probably to be the ultimate heavy metal song, the best riff ever written, and, kind of the progenitor of everything heavy, period, really. But that tone is it's a lightly overdriven, very loud recording of Jimmy playing the Les Paul with the rockabilly middle position pickup most of the time.
Sure.
That's the powerful sound, and you can really hear it on the isolated tracks too, which are available on YouTube. And it's the opposite of what people think. So, people think heavy metal or heavy music. They're thinking, okay, it's the bridge pickup with a Marshall all the way up with maybe even a distortion pedal on top of that. And that might be true for, say, Randy Rhoads or Judas Priest or the Scorpions or something like that. But that's not what it was for Led Zeppelin, especially at this time. To the best of my reckoning, he probably didn't even use the tone bender on the second album. It's, as far as I can tell, it's going to be just amplifier distortion. Now, there are other tracks that he used the Marshall on. This was also the album that the Marshall came into play. And I know that Jimmy has said that the Marshall was used on Heartbreaker and the Sonny Boy Williamson song "Bring It On Home."
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So those were ones that Jimmy confirmed was the Marshall amplifier. In those same pictures from Olympic Studios, there may be a wider shot that we have, I think, where Jimmy's sitting playing acoustic guitar there. You can show that picture, which will show a Marshall head and a Marshall cabinet, which I think, yeah, there it is, that Marshall cabinet there and a Marshall head. I believe that may have actually been John Paul Jones's, could have been John Paul Jones's gear.
Okay.
Jonesy was using, I think at this point, acoustic amplifiers, the brand Acoustic. So it's possible that the Marshall is Jimmy's, but I think it actually was likely more that it was Jonesy's amp on that album. And when you listen to things like Heartbreaker, which has clearly got distortion on it, I don't know whether he used a fuzz. I think Jonesy probably plugged into that Marshall and got some distortion on it. So when you hear that really heavy, that heavy bass sound on Heartbreaker, I believe it's, my guess is that it's Jonesy using the Marshall there. So anyway, so that's kind of the main thing you're going to hear on, say, What Is and What Should Never Be. You're going to hear Jimmy cycle through all of the pickup selections. So you're using the neck pickup for the quiet parts and the slide solo, and then he switches to the bridge pickup during the slide solo for dynamics, and sort of like the chorus is definitely the bridge pickup, but it's not super distorted. It's an overdriven, great sound, so those tunes, to the best of my knowledge and the way I've what I've read in the anthology and what I've read in the interviews, that that at least I know or can say with some degree of evidence that it's Whole Lotta Love and What Is and What Should Never Be, definitely with that Vox UL 4120 head, the Vox Long Tom Echo, and the Rickenbacker transonic cabinets is that setup. And then Heartbreaker and Bring It On Home, and possibly Ramble On, I want to say, might have been the Marshall.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So this is when he's transitioning, he's transitioning to different gear. The Telecaster goes, the Les Paul comes in, and then, as Jimmy called it, a hodgepodge of amplifiers and cabinets gets usurped by the Marshall and Marshall cabinets. And then, but still, Jimmy didn't really full-fledged go into the Marshall thing until really more like 71. Because in 70 he was, and we'll talk about that later when we get to the third album on another show, but sure, he was starting to use, in January of 1970, he's starting to use the high watt gear.
Yes.
And so that, so he's changing. But by this time in the summer of 1969, this is where the Les Paul comes in, and all that gear I described is pretty much being used. Another thing, as I had mentioned in the last episode about Communication Breakdown, the solo of Communication Breakdown was that gray prototype Vox wah-wah that I had shown, and that's with the wah depressed pretty much in the full treble position for that entire solo, and the lead overdubs on the vamp at the end of Communication Breakdown. Well, the solo from Whole Lotta Love also features that same gray Vox prototype wah-wah, all the way in the treble position. You can actually hear the very first notes of the solo. You can hear Jimmy pressing the especially in the isolated tracks, you can hear Jimmy about to overdub that solo, and you can hear him, the wah is making a, like sometimes you turn on a wah and you can hear it through the amplifier without even playing anything. You can hear it go, like that. So you can actually hear Jimmy hold it back in the bass position as he's waiting for the track to play so he can play the solo, right? He's overdubbing the solo. You can hear right as he makes the first bend on the G string at the 14th fret, you can hear him depress it all the way, and he goes, so that's him. You can hear him depressing the wah all the way into the treble position right there. and the wah-wah stays engaged like that for the entire solo. So that confused a lot of people. I think a lot of people thought that thin sound was the Telecaster.
Ah.
So this is where a lot of the confusion came. People thought, oh, Jimmy can make a Telecaster sound like a Les Paul. And so that must be what he did on the solo of Whole Lotta Love. And that's not the case. It was the wah-wah that did it. So again, to the best of my reckoning, there is no Telecaster on Led Zeppelin 2 whatsoever.
I've got a question, Al. So is there any evidence to suggest that Page, in between the time of him purchasing the Les Paul and it being presented live in the States, is there any evidence to indicate that Jimmy was getting used to that guitar? Was he breaking it in? What was he rehearsing with it?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I started wondering that myself just a few minutes before we got on the broadcast, because I'm looking through Dave Lewis and Mike Tremaglio's book, Evenings with Led Zeppelin, the expanded edition, and I was looking at it, and I'm trying to suss out, okay, when did he get the Les Paul? And it's still kind of unclear, but it is clear that he had it for months in the UK, did not use it live. And Jimmy also had, he had the Black Beauty Les Paul. He clearly left that at home. He didn't bring that on the UK tour. He was only using the Telecaster. The early UK tour in the beginning of 69. So it is a puzzlement. I don't know why. Maybe it needed some work. Maybe it needed a new nut. I know that Jimmy kept the original Kluson tuners on the guitar for the recording of the album and for the first several dates of the 69 tour in America when he was using the Les Paul. Okay. Eventually, he switched to Grovers a little bit later on in that summer. I know I believe by the time he started, they played Toronto. I think that may be when he put the Grover tuners on in that kind of time frame. But it's an interesting question, because I haven't figured that out. Why? And this also led to some confusion, because again, the Black Beauty Les Paul, a lot of people think the Black Beauty Les Paul was used on A Whole Lotta Love. They think that in the bridge section that it's like the depressed Bigsby tremolo, and he's doing things with the Bigsby.
Yeah.
I may have mentioned this to you before in another interview, but it's not the case. What he did was, and I actually got the specific tone in the crashing guitar sounds that you hear in the bridge freak out psychedelic section of Whole Lotta Love, is actually Jimmy had detuned the 6th string on the regular Les Paul standard down to a specific pitch. I think it might have been around B, but I notated the actual specific pitch, and you can hear what he's doing with that. When you detune a string, you guys, any guitar player knows this. When you massively detune a string, and to use Jimmy's words, he said, "I radically detuned the 6th string."
Mm-hmm.
You can do all kinds of things with that floppy 6th string. Like you can bend that fat string from here to eternity and do these wide pitch bends, and you get these really low kind of flapping sounds of the string kind of hitting the fingerboard and hitting the pickups and stuff like that. And that's what you're hearing in that freak out section. It's not the Bigsby of the Black Beauty Les Paul. So that was another confusing thing. People contend that the Black Beauty was used on it. It just plain wasn't. This is from Jimmy's mouth, and the recording bears it out. It just is.
Sure.
That's what it is. It is an interesting thing. Why did he have the Black Beauty Les Paul and at home? I know why. He probably didn't take it with him to America at that time. Maybe he didn't want to risk losing it. He did eventually play the Black Beauty for the first time in America at the Carnegie Hall show in late '69. And then, of course, that was when they added the Eddie Cochran songs to the set, Come On Everybody and Something Else. Something
Sure.
else was considered a track for Led Zeppelin 2, but they didn't ultimately record it, as far as I know. But that's what they were doing. They were playing the Eddie Cochran numbers, and so they were using the Bigsby for the Eddie Cochran numbers live in a as you see it in the January 1970 Royal Albert Hall show. You'll see them perform those two songs.
Yeah.
So that again, that led to some confusion there. No Black Beauty. It's so that's still, it's a strange thing. Why did Jimmy have the Les Paul for so many months and never used it? Not quite sure why that is. He wasn't getting anything major done to it. I mean, I believe it may have been just a stock guitar. I don't believe he started changing pickups around until much later. He certainly didn't put the tuners on until several months later, after the April shows, when he starts using it. So yeah, that was going on in my mind. Excellent question, Andrew. You read my mind. It's a great question, and boy, I don't really have the answer. That would be a excellent question, to put to Jimmy, if anybody ever gets in front of him, to ask him such a question again.
Jimmy, if you ever want to come on and hang out with Alan and I, and have Alan ask you these questions, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I know Jimmy doesn't engage in this kind of stuff, clearly, not the way that some other artists do, but I've got friends that know him. I've got friends that have hung out with him, and like, I wish I knew them back when they were hanging out with him, because I would have been able to ask all these questions, and I probably would have gotten some answers, but maybe there'll be a day where maybe Brad Talinsky will interview him again, and maybe I can kind of slip that under the rug.
Yeah.
The anthology, again, is a wonderful reference work. There's still some things that I need to clear up in there, and but anyway, so that's kind of it. That's the long and the short of it on the electric guitar. So what we then go to is the acoustic guitar and the few tracks. People think of the Brown Bomber, the Led Zeppelin 2 album, as being such a heavy album because of Whole Lotta Love and Heartbreaker. This photo shows Jimmy tracking the song La La, which was introduced, that was officially released on the recent reissues of the Super Deluxe box sets. Jimmy is playing the EROS Dakota 606 guitar, and that is so because you can see the insignia on the headstock of the guitar. It's not a box, it's not the there was another brand that people thought it was, but that's not it. It's the EROS Dakota 606 acoustic, and that was used for the acoustic guitar solo and acoustic parts on Thank You, and then of course it was used on Ramble On. So our the god of YouTube rock and roll and music stuff, Rick Beato, did an excellent video. And Rick was able to find himself, I believe he found himself a Vox guitar that he thought was the same brand as Jimmy's. It was not. No. So, but it was constructed the same way and likely from the same factory. It has a bolt-on neck, and it just, the bridge is the same. It's a unique sounding guitar, and Rick did an excellent breakdown of Ramble On and the unique sound that particular acoustic had. Jimmy did want to use the same Gibson J200 that he used on the first album, but the producer Mickey Most would not let him borrow that guitar for the second album for whatever reason. Jimmy did end up borrowing that guitar for the early 1970 appearance on the Julie Felix show when he played White Summer, Black Mountainside. That's the only video and the only pictures of Jimmy playing that actual guitar. So he ended up going with this EROS Dakota 606 guitar for the acoustic parts on Led Zeppelin 2, and it's great. It lent an interesting tone, that was different than what was done on the first album, and not because Jimmy wanted that. Jimmy he wanted the Gibson, but he just had to make do with what he had,
So I've got a question for you, Al, in regards to that. So we know that the Gibson guitars, right through their history, were always, because they were handmade and their brand, its brand, and the way it was marketed, were always expensive guitars. Through through whatever point in history. But for us watching and the people watching the replay, explain to us the guitar that he played. From my understanding, it wasn't a top of the range guitar. It was just a very average guitar, Al. That people would just walk in and buy.
Right, and I think our pal, the rock professor, might even have seen that guitar. It was a cheap guitar that was common. It was made in Italy, but it was sold primarily to the UK market. So a lot of people in the UK had access to those guitars. They were cheap, flat top.
I've got an Echo Ranger, which is similar.
Yeah. So that's what it was. I'm sorry, that was good. I'm glad you remembered that. So that was the brands. People thought it was a Vox. People thought it was the Echo Ranger.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
It was not. It was the Eros, but all made under the same auspices and in the same general type of construction. Later on the 72 Australia tour, Jimmy did play a 12-string Vox guitar that's similar to that one. Or it may have been, can't remember if it was the Vox or it was the Echo Ranger. It may have been the Echo Ranger that he played in Australia. But, and there's where the confusion comes in, but you have to look for that headstock logo, which is really easy to identify, the Eros logo. And there are a couple of pictures. Can't see it in that one, but you can see it in the long shot. There's kind of a white part that's on the very top of the headstock right there. You can see, and then there's another photo that I didn't send you that's real easy to, you can really clearly make out the Eros logo in that. So there's two pictures that clearly define it as an Eros guitar. So, yeah.
So there's something about, obviously, a lot of the instruments that these guys were using, they weren't necessarily going to the expensive guitars, because the Vox guitars, as I understand too, weren't top of the range. They were, again, just considered a very good average instrument. And, there was clearly something about those guitars that appealed to Jimmy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it could have been just a utilitarian thing. Again, it was a bolt-on neck guitar. It was cheap. It was a cheap guitar, and Jimmy wasn't in the habit of buying expensive things back then. Jimmy was, famous, and there's many stories of him being cheap and, all that kind of stuff. But, Jimmy was just wise with his money. He had a lot of money from the sessions, and that guy bought a nice house, in Pangbourne, the boathouse that we see the pictures of there. It's, he was putting his money into those types of things. He bought antiques, he bought lots of, he would pick stuff up there, but, he did not have, a Gibson J200. He borrowed that one, So it's, that's when Rock Professor says the Echo Ranger 12 that he says he got in 1978, that was likely the same style that Jimmy used in Australia in 1972 for the performances of Tangerine there. But again, similar, but not the same, similar design and everything, and probably made in the same factory indeed, But Jimmy was, it took some convincing on the part of Joe Walsh to get Jimmy to buy the #1 Les Paul, because, Jimmy's mindset, and he said this in interviews and he says it in the anthology, was, hey, I've already got a Les Paul. I've got the Black Beauty Les Paul. Why do I need another Les Paul? And, after some wrangling and probably price dropping on Joe's part, and Joe had said, hey, I think you need this guitar. Interesting thing about that #1 Les Paul is that it was not stock. The guitar had the neck shaved down quite a bit. So, and that is confirmed, that picture right there, which is Jimmy making a face, and the Rock Professor can attest to this. That is the long British tradition of gurning, which is pulling very ridiculous faces for comic effect, and Jimmy is doing that in that picture. This is confirmed to be from the actual session for Whole Lotta Love right there. And so he is he's just cracks me up to look at that picture. I don't even it's just hilarious. but yeah, so he got that guitar. As you can see, the original Kluson tuners are on the guitar right there, as it was throughout the entire recording of the second album and for much of the summer tour until he put the Grovers on a little bit later. But yeah, the neck, I believe it's a 59, and it had a fatter neck that would have been less comfortable in the upper registers. It's pretty well known that the 1960 Sunburst Les Pauls typically had a much slimmer neck.
Yep.
And I've played a 60 Les Paul. My friend JD Simo let me play the one that he was borrowing at the time, and it was an exquisite instrument. And I had previously had a 57 reissue gold top Les Paul, which had a huge neck that was virtually impossible to play in the upper registers. I mean, past the 15th fret, forget about it. You're risking severe injury playing that guitar in those positions. But a 60 Les Paul, the one that I got to play the burst, the magic was there. I had never played a real Sunburst before, but as I've said it before, it's not hype if you get a real one and you play one of the really good ones. And they're not all great guitars, but the bursts were really, really great. No question about it. And so the guitar the neck was shaved by a luthier, I believe, in Cleveland, that I believe may have done it for Joe Walsh, and they did a great job of refinishing the neck. It's a much slimmer neck. It's not the average neck. So this is why Jimmy's able to play that, no problem in the upper registers on so many of the great songs like Since I've Been Loving You and all the stuff that he did up, the magic that he did up at the top register. It was just comfortable on that guitar. And I can see why Joe pressed him on the issue. And Joe just wanted to make some money and sell that guitar and get rid of it. And there's that. And I do believe that Joe actually thought, hey, this is something that Jimmy Page needs to have in his hands, and so that's how that went. I saw the Rock Professor asked a quick question. So yeah, Jimmy played 2 acoustic guitars at Earl's Court, and we'll probably get to that on a later show, but he's just playing the Martins. He had 2 Martins, one of which was for That's the Way, and the other one was for Going California, Bron-Rar Stomp. So those ones were, he had 2 different guitars specific for those songs. And that's a whole other situation that we'll get into around the third album recording as far as the Martins. Jimmy has some memory problems when it comes to when he got the Martin and when he was using the Harmony H1260. So Jimmy claims that he used the Harmony H1260 for the entirety of Led Zeppelin 3.
Yeah.
And then he acts like he didn't actually get the Martins until the Houses of the Holy sessions. But the fact is, and I don't know if it was the same Martin, I can't prove it, but Jimmy used a Martin on the 1970 tour. So Jimmy doesn't remember that, even though he has pictures in the anthology of him playing a Martin on the 1970 tour in the book. So in the book, he actually is claiming that he didn't get the Martin until 1972 for the Houses of the Holy sessions. But so anyway, I believe that maybe Jimmy might have either not borrowed, but maybe rented one or had the Martin and then didn't use it. He used it on tour. But, I believe Jimmy when he says that he used the Harmony H1260 for the entire third album and the entire fourth album acoustic tracks. And it was also available in sight for the Houses of the Holy sessions at Stargroves in 1972. So, that's one of the questions that I'd have to drill down with Jimmy. And I think it's just his memory isn't quite good enough to recall that he did indeed use the Martin on the 1970 tour. And he did use the Harmony H1260 on the 1972 tour. Strangely, he had the for a good deal of the 1972 tour, he used the Harmony H1260 for the acoustic set then, and for some reason he used the Martin on the 70 tour. Don't know why.
So a keen-eyed editor would have picked that up. Yeah.
Yeah, but Jimmy has said that in many interviews over the years. He is confused about when that happened, and only if you show him the photos and say, "Hey, this is the 1970 tour," at Bath, Jimmy is playing Bath 1970. He's playing the Martin, or a Martin, for the acoustic sets, and he's not using the harmony. But I do believe that he is using the harmony for all of the recording of Led Zeppelin 3 and Led Zeppelin 4, as he says. Okay. Just because I have a Harmony H1260 and the sound is pretty, I mean, I'm fallible. My ears are fallible, but I really believe that Jimmy's telling the truth when he says he used the Harmony H1260 on Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4. So yeah, that's for a later show. But that that's kind of how some of those acoustics shake out.
We look forward to that too.
Yeah.
Wow. I just want to back up a little bit about what you said. So maybe he was just borrowing the guitar, because you know how sometimes when you can use something, you don't necessarily register with it in your mind until you actually own it. I can understand that. If it's not hanging up on your wall daily or sitting there in the corner in your living room, well then it's not going to register that. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, it's a possibility. I tend to think that Jimmy actually did own the Martin that he used on the 1970 tour. I really believe that he probably owned that guitar, but may not have brought it with him to the sessions that he was doing for the third and fourth albums for whatever reason, just like he owned the Black Beauty Les Paul and did not bring it to the sessions for the second album. Even though those sessions began at Olympic in the UK, he could have very easily brought that Black Beauty for the sessions of Led Zeppelin 2, but for whatever reason he did not. So that's mysterious. Don't know why. Knowing Jimmy, I believe he probably actually owned it. I wouldn't think that he would rent per se that an acoustic guitar for an entire tour. I think he would probably think that was throwing good money after bad, and he didn't like to throw his money away. I think he's just a little fuzzy about when he got that first Martin, for sure. Then again, he got a second one. I believe he got the second one maybe in 75, and certainly you can see the two guitars side by side in the 1977 pictures. So he definitely had two Martins at one point, Martin 6 strings. Then he later got a Martin 12 string and other things. So, but yeah, that's down the road. That's when it gets really interesting, because the first and second albums is just like they quick. They banged it out. Second album was recorded on the road primarily, and so not as much attention that you would get like on the third album is when they started being just their artistic thing started really flowering on the third album, and that's when these different instruments start coming in, and the acoustic and different amplifiers are being used than necessarily what's on the road. So that things start getting very interesting there. So that's when we'll be getting in depth about lots of stuff, and probably need a little more time on those ones, because this is simple stuff. First two albums are simple. I've already told you everything that he used on the whole album already, and it ain't that much, I can only fill it out by saying like there's a couple of anecdotes, like Heartbreaker. Moby Dick was another one. The track for that was recorded with the Marshalls as well. That's another one that's a definite Marshall track. Heartbreaker, the two band parts of Heartbreaker were recorded separately from the guitar solo, the unaccompanied guitar solo. So those two things, had been recorded on the road. Jimmy decided to do the unaccompanied guitar solo. So there's isolated tracks and bootlegs of the 3 different takes that Jimmy did back to back of that unaccompanied guitar solo.
Sure.
2 of which were okay. The third of which was very good. And it was hilarious because I believe it might have been the first or second take that he got the one on. And by the third one, you could tell he's kind of getting tired and his fingers are not working. And he actually says on the tape, I can't get any more out of this. And that was typically how Jimmy worked. And he said this many times, he would typically do about 3 takes and then choose the one that was the best. I'm with you, Brad. I think Jimmy did the best he could do recently with the anthology and the other projects, the book projects and working on the super deluxe editions. And he probably documented stuff a lot better than a lot of other artists would have done. You know, Jimmy is the kind of guy that kept receipts, and he kept a lot of gear. He has a massive amount of gear, as you'll see in the anthology.
Oh,
you know, so he really did do a great job. So what I'm talking, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I'm splitting hairs here a little bit, but those are just that's just one inconsistency that I noticed. Before I forget, let me not forget. Let's jump to that picture of the Fender Electric 12 string that Jimmy played. That one right there. So that is a guitar that he played in the Yardbirds. He played it on Glimpses and Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sailor on the Little Games album. He had played that on Livin', Lovin', Maid, She's Just a Woman. So that's the other electric guitar on the album that is unusual. So hold on just a second.
No dramas,
That's
brother.
okay. Let him play. Let him play. So anyway, sorry about that. So yeah, so that's the other guitar. There's electric 12 string on Livin', Lovin', Maid, She's Just a Woman. That's the guitar that he used, and he also used the that same guitar on Traveling Riverside Blues that you hear on BBC sessions, which were recorded around the time of the recording of the second album. So you'll hear that, and he did that in an open tuning, and then later on that same Vox Electric 12 was used in conjunction with the Fender Electric 12 on Stairway to Heaven. So there were two 12-string guitars, two different 12-string guitars used on that track on Stairway to Heaven. But listen closely to Livin', Lovin', Maid. You can hear that electric 12-string ringing out those riffs. You know, and it's such a kind of a riff-heavy song, and people think of Livin', Lovin', Maid as kind of like a throwaway riff rock song. But that song is, again, based in the folk tradition being played on an electric 12-string guitar. It's got more to do with the Byrds than it does Black Sabbath or anything like that. Yeah. Interesting. Then that guitar solo also, by the way, on Livin', Lovin', Maid, there are overdubs. There are kind of rhythm slashes and overdubs in the chorus, and you hear it during the solo as well, of Jimmy using the wah-wah. And again, Jimmy's using the gray Vox wah-wah on that track. So there's some wah-wah parts on there, to be sure.
Awesome. I think what's really, really cool about what we do here as fans, Alan, and you know, we've said it before, and we're probably always going to say it, and it fits in and slots into what Brad's saying here with his comments. You know, the archaeology that we're doing as organic fans is going to sort of fill in those gaps or those spots where clearly, you know, the anthology, for what it's worth, and it's a fantastic publication. You know, we've all got copies of it, and we recommend that you go out and get it. It's just fantastic. You know, there's photos of there where Jimmy saves all his guitar strings. There's and he's got them categorized. It's just remarkable.
That's a great point that you make right there, because, you know, our pal Chris Gill is, you know, he that's a project that's kind of going, but, you know, he's at least trying to be on board with, you know, he wants to, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but sure, he would like to get a good comprehensive book like the anthology out about Eddie's guitars, and hopefully he'll be able to do that. Hopefully that's something that could be on the horizon at some point. We talk about, you know, kind of obscure guitars that have never been mentioned before, you know, for Van Halen tracks, and I hope that comes about someday. Also, did I see our friend Caleb here?
Yeah.
All right,
Caleb.
He
said, Alan's such a nerd.
I know. I'm a nerd for Nerd Halen. And listen, I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but I'm going to be excited to go meet the handsome and extremely tall Caleb Rappaport in person with my good friend Kevin Dodds, author of Edward Van Halen.
His biography.
And unauthorized biography. He and I are going to go and visit our pal Caleb Rappaport in Austin, Texas, when they play here shortly. I believe it's October 2nd. And
wow,
Caleb knows we're going to come see him and harass him. So we're gonna have a great time. Going to be able to take in the truly unique, wild and crazy fun experience that is Nerd Halen. So we're super excited about that. This is a road trip for me. I'm driving from Houston to Austin, which is, you know, a couple of hours away,
Sure.
but going to be great for me to catch up with my old pal Kevin Dodds. As I may have said, Kevin Dodds, October 2nd. That's right, Caleb. And Kevin and I have known each other since we were 14 years old, and I've talked about that many times. He and I are extreme Van Halen nerds, and we can't wait to get around that crew, the ultimate, for my money, one of the most entertaining acts that's out there. I mean, these guys have a good time, and the audience has a good time. There's no denying it. Caleb and the guys have worked so hard, especially Caleb, obviously. I can't say enough about them. So, man, when those guys roll into town, go see Nerd Halen, for the love of God. You will not regret it. You're going to have a lot of fun.
Well done. Well done.
Yep. Hold on. Yes, baby.
That's
You can do it. My son's playing with Play-Doh. He needs to go wash his hands. So.
Okay. Well, it's such a good shout out to Caleb and the band too. So fantastic. And we look forward to catching up with you when we do another ZoSo show. You can give us a review and a report back on the gig. We look forward to that.
Sounds great.
Are we done, Al?
That's pretty much it. The last thing I'd mentioned, I'll fill in just a little bit. So the Heartbreaker guitar solo in the middle, again, was recorded at a separate session, and Jimmy's guitar is tuned a lot higher on the unaccompanied solo than it is on the rest of the track. That was something that kind of flummoxed me. Somebody else pointed that out in an interview to Jimmy, and Jimmy was not aware of it. He was like, "Oh, is it? I didn't know." And it certainly is. So yeah, he's tuned way higher. And when I was a kid, I was learning it, and I kept not understanding why I would be in tune when I was playing the regular track, and then when the unaccompanied solo would come on, I wasn't in tune. And especially when you're doing the behind the nut bends in that solo, I would sit there and just push with all my might, and I could never reach the pitch. And I thought, oh, it must be because maybe the Les Paul is something. Then when I got a Les Paul, I was like, it's even harder to do it on a Les Paul. Then I realized, oh my God, he's got to be almost a quarter of a step higher on the unaccompanied guitar solo part of that song. And Moby Dick was actually interestingly recorded the same way. Obviously, the band track for Moby Dick, the beginning and the end, when the band plays, was recorded separately, and then Bonzo recorded his actual drum solo in between, and they were edited together. So.
Correct, because they were recorded at various studios, weren't they? But part of the appeal, because we've ranked this track, this album, and I think you and I and the Rock Professor, we even spoke about this. So part of the appeal, part of the charm of that album is that that's an example of the technology that was available, but the fans still loved it, and we love it today.
Absolutely, it's. There's imperfections, there's wonderful little things that, that Vox long tom echo again, you might, before we go, you can pull up that one picture of Jimmy kind of messing around with the insides of the Vox long tom echo. That's a really cool picture right there.
Hold on.
Make sure we get through all those.
There
that one right there. It's a great photo. He's playing around with the controls on the Vox long tom echo. So you're hearing that on Thank You on the electric 12-string guitar, and you're hearing that, of course, on the slide guitar solo from What Is and What Should Never Be. And you're hearing that on the theremin during Whole Lotta Love. And I believe you may actually be hearing some slapback echo on the main guitar track from the Vox long tom on Whole Lotta Love as well.
Remarkable.
Super cool, unusual. It's an unusual, relatively rare echo device, that it gets you that sort of Hank Marvin Shadows kind of sound in a way. It's different than some of the others on the market. You get to hear Jimmy playing with that great you hear Jimmy playing with that echo on the Fillmore West bootleg, where you can hear him. Let's see, and how many more times?
Oh, yep.
If you guys pull up the bootleg from the Fillmore West, the San Francisco show, you can hear Jimmy playing with that long tom echo, and he's really using it to great effect, man. Oh, he was just having a lot of fun with that, and it's kind of cheesy when you listen to it now in a way, but boy, I think it's a lot of fun. And this is starting to be the end of the time where necessarily what's on the road is the gear being used in the studio. Okay.
Sure.
Now, as we get into the next time we get together, we're probably going to talk about Led Zeppelin 3.
Sure.
And that's again when their artistic flowering is happening and they're using a lot of different stuff. And it's gonna get crazy. Hang on to your hats. Wait for the next episode because it's gonna be wild.
And I'm glad you said artistic flowering because our co-host on the channel here, Brad, always points to Led Zeppelin 3 as the example of that. Certainly, 1 and 2 have their roles and their places in history, but the archaeology on Led Zeppelin 3 just indicates everywhere else that they're going from that album, Al. I look forward to hanging out with you, and you're welcome here. You can come on any show on this channel, but I like the fact that you and I get together on the ZoSo show and talk gear. I love it.
Oh, it's great fun. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to seeing y'all. And shout out to Simon and Brad, all the usual suspects. Just love being here with you and all our pals in the chat there. It's great fun.
I'm going to do a quick shout out while we're here, bro, and wish everybody well. So we've got Fast Eddie, VH, he was in here. A good friend of the channel, Gretch Zeppelin, is here. Christopher Live Sauer, good to see you, brother. Keith Van Halen Campbell, is always a pleasure to catch up with you. The Rock Professor Simon Williams was in here offering some great comments and support for the channel. Gretch Zeppelin, I've already met Gretch Zeppelin. Brad Cook, another co-host. Symmetry, thank you, brother. Nerd Halen was in here. Dan of New Jersey, thank you. Hugh Caldwell, he's going to be on the channel with us next weekend. We're going to be ranking the tracks. Band of Gypsies, wow, that's going to be great. I think we've got them all. Tim Thomas, another great friend of the channel. Robert Ranford, Guitar Man 45. I think Al, I think that's everybody. L&M Guitar Center, another good friend of the channel. Please, guys, if you have not subscribed to our channel, if you're watching a replay, please do. I invite you to go to our channels page, subscribe to all our friends there. Alan is there. Subscribe to Alan. I'll attach a couple of links on this video here for you to go and check out what Alan is doing on his channel. Alan won't tell you what he's doing. We will.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for all the support and the shout outs and everything. It's great. I just like to put this junk out there, and if anybody cares about it, it's, if they find it, it's great. If they don't, okay.
Well, look, we love it. And like I said at the top of the show, Al, the comments that people leave, and you going back and interacting with those comments is always great, and we
please do,
that.
Guys. Any of you guys in the chat, if you have any questions about, Led Zeppelin gear, I'm happy to answer them, and I'll get to it straight away.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm going to wish you guys all the best. This is the first show today of 3. So I'm going to be back in a few hours with a couple of good friends talking about Van Halen. And then about 6 hours' time, I'm going to be with the Rock Professor, Brad, and Zach Edris, and we're going to be ranking the tracks Come Taste the Band by Deep Purple. Great album. It's going to be interesting because, are there going to be tussles between the co-hosts as to what versions of Deep Purple are the... Yeah.
I know. Boy, when Tommy Bolin enters the picture, then the opinions, it's almost like Sammy and Dave. I mean, it's crazy. Gosh. Oh, hey, so say hi to my friend John Conklin for me when he gets on the show, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, we certainly will. We've got some interesting news to share, and this might be the show. If not, it's coming. So just another little achievement for the channel. But hold on. We'll let you know anyway. If you guys don't watch the show, we'll do a separate little video. But we got something cooking in the background, ladies and gentlemen. Peace. God bless. Al, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we're going to get out of here, and you're going to go and wash your boys' hands of Play-Doh.
That's right. Thank you so much, guys. Great. Can't wait to see you again. Listen to more Led Zeppelin. Open your ears. There's always something great to discover in Led Zeppelin records that you didn't know about before. It's wonderful.
Wow.